All right, everybody, let's get started with the November edition of Clayton Library Presents. Thank you all for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If it's not your first time, thank you for the continued support that you do give us through Clayton Library Presents and joining us on our presentations. And of course, we are open. We are open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. And if you have a question, we would love to talk to you, or by email, by all means. Our phone number is 832-393-2600, and our email is cla.reference@houstontx.gov. That'll be going through the chat periodically, so if you didn't get it down right now, watch the chat. And again, Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. If you're interested in having us come and talk to your group in the area, we're starting to do some in-person things, but we are more than happy to do it electronically through Zoom or the platform that you are using. You can call us at the same number, 832-393-2600, or of course, our email reference link also. So today, I am super excited to introduce Jen Baldwin. Jen and I have been friends for probably a good 8-9 years through the community, and there's some things that we've done together in Massachusetts and spent some time together on vacation. That was really sweet. And so Jen has been working in the realm of professional genealogy since 2010, but she's been pursuing her family history a lot of ways since she was 10 years old, as a lot of ways as we have, enjoying those grandmother stories and her cookies sitting around that kitchen table. That's a lot of ways that we heard those stories and got started. She's currently the North American Content Manager and Global Ambassador Program Lead for Find My Past. She lectures, she writes, she consults on a variety of genealogy-related topics, and was part of the research team for the Genealogy Roadshow, 2 seasons on PBS. Forgot about that. Those were good times too. She is the author of course material for the National Institute of Genealogical Studies, and she's excited to discover unique resources that allow for a different perspective in genealogy research, including the vast research opportunities for family historians around the world to take advantage of the United Kingdom collections, such as newspapers and the upcoming, very excitingly, 1920 Census of England and Wales. And I'm excited because Jen and I are gene cousins, like DNA genes. We both have the redhead gene.
Yeah.
So, so dear cousin, here you are. Jen, by all means, everyone enjoy the presentation, and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you, Jen, very much for joining us.
Thank you, Sue, so much for the introduction. That was lovely. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I think this is the first time I've had the opportunity to do a program for Clayton. And so this is pretty exciting for me. I am going to go ahead and pop my screen up. So someone just confirm really quick that looks okay.
Looks great.
Okay, perfect. Good. So I will do my best to keep this to an hour, but I will admit straight off the bat that I will probably talk longer than an hour. Find My Past is really your source for British and Irish research, and I would love seeing the comments come through on your earliest ancestors during that colonial period or beyond from the UK. That's really what Find My Past is all about, is making that research a little bit easier and kind of bridging the gap between the old world, right, as the UK is often referred to, and the new world, whether that was North America, Canada, the United States, or Australia, New Zealand, or other places around the globe. So today I want to tell you a whole lot about Find My Past, and we're going to dive into a sample of records. We're going to look at some search best practices. I'm going to talk about what's new and what's coming, and all sorts of things. So with that in mind, let's just dive in. One of my best stories, and one of my favorite finds on Find My Past actually is my colonial ancestor. So Henry Collins was my 9th great grandfather, and he arrived on the Abigail in 1635. He left London and the St. Dunstan Parish after getting permission to do so, right? People couldn't just walk down to the dock and get on a boat and leave. They actually had to get permission through the local parish. And you can find those records in the Registers of Licenses to Pass Beyond the Seas collection on Find My Past. And I am going to leave it at that for now, but we will go back to that story in a few minutes. So today we're going to look mostly kind of the British and Irish records overview. I'm just going to give you some highlights and some of my favorite examples because there's so much to cover. We'll look a little bit from a global perspective and what makes us stand out from other opportunities for research. Again, we'll talk about those kind of best practices for research on the site itself. And then I'll finish up with some tips, tricks, and just some nuances that are important to know for those of us in North America. So really quickly, just to introduce you to the company itself. Find My Past is owned by DC Thomson, which is a very long-running newspaper publishing company in Dundee, Scotland. They're actually on their 7th generation of family members owning and operating the company, and we are just one branch of that particular organization. Our focus is on really long, healthy relationships with the cultural institutions with which we work. So you'll see a lot of material from the National Archives and Kew, the British Library, the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, with whom we've had a relationship for many years now. Our offices are in London and Dundee, Scotland, and we have a handful of remote employees around the world, of which, of course, I am one. As Sue mentioned, I'm based in Colorado. And our brands include Find My Past, the British Newspaper Archive, Genes Reunited, and the Catholic Heritage Archive. So the question I'm asked probably more than any other by far over the course of my tenure with the company is, of course, what makes Find My Past different, right? We know there are a lot of opportunities out there. There's a lot of places to research your family history. And so we would like to think that we offer you something unique and special. So when do you turn to Find My Past? Well, if you're looking for anybody, British, Irish, Scottish, or Welsh, and that includes Northern Ireland, I did see a couple comments about Northern Ireland in the chat, then you definitely want to give Find My Past a try. We definitely have a huge collection of Roman Catholic records, really from around the world, but the biggest sets are from North America, from the United States, and then from the UK. We have an incredible collection of periodicals and newspapers, which we'll talk about a little bit, but also things you might not think about, such as our US marriages collection. It's actually the largest collection of marriage records available online. We have some really unique materials from the Mid-Atlantic region, New York and Ontario. We have a couple of really incredible historic photograph collections covering the UK and actually reaching into Canada as well. So there's a lot of opportunity. And if you're really thinking about how your ancestors landed here in the New World or in the colonies or later in history from Britain, Ireland, and associated countries, then certainly you want to give Find My Past a try. Now, there are a lot of variations in British and Irish research, and there are a lot of trouble spots, as I like to think of them, but Find My Past is kind of on a mission to cover up those trouble spots and make them a little bit less troublesome. So in England, for example, civil registration starts in 1837. And for some of us in the US, that might sound really early, but compared to British history, that's actually quite late. So our parish record collection starts almost 300 years earlier in every instance. In Ireland, if you've done any research in Ireland, you know that there's been major record loss and destruction across the country. So we've spent the last several years digging up these unconventional records to fill in the gaps, right? There is no more real census. Most of the censuses of Ireland were destroyed, along with parish registers and other really essential genealogical materials. We're filling our time trying to replace those with census and parish substitutes. In Scotland, the government maintains control over a large number of different types of collections. So we're working with small partnerships, small institutions, local genealogy societies to bring additional options online. And we now have the largest collection of family history material online today for Scotland. And then in Wales, one of the trickiest things beyond the Welsh language is that Wales and England are not typically administratively distinct. So we actually make a real effort to pull Wales out away from England so that it's much easier to identify those materials. With that, let's kind of dig into some of those records. And I mentioned parish records. They really are one of the two key backbones of British and Irish and Scottish and Welsh genealogy. Census would be the other one. But in the UK, the British parish records collection, Scottish parish records, and so forth, that's really essential for any research across the British Isles. So as you can see from the diagram on the screen, we have coverage across the country, including all of Scotland, all of Ireland, all of Northern Ireland, and every county in England. There's not a location, a geopolitical location that's unrepresented on the Find My Past site. If we wanted to jump into a few examples of those records, and this is where we all really enjoy this, right? This is the fun part. I like to showcase some of the ones that I think are very interesting to the North American audience. So I always start with Westminster marriages, just because it's so expansive. It's 4 centuries worth of historical records. The example you're looking at on the screen is Ezekiel Taylor and Mary Simmons, just right in the middle there under the word February. They got married in the city of Westminster in 1681 at the St. Mary Le Strand parish. So 4 centuries of marriages covering about 40 parishes, which over the course of the Westminster area is pretty sizable. For those of us who had ancestors who maybe didn't quite follow the status quo, you definitely want to look at the nonconformist records. We have births and baptisms, marriages, and a handful of other materials. And again, the year span is pretty extensive, 1689 to 1837, right up until when civil registration begins. And the reason nonconformists are so intriguing and of course so important is that for us over here in the States, a lot of our ancestors came to the colonies because they didn't quite want to sit in the Church of England, right? They wanted to practice a faith that was different or non-conforming. And so these materials really become quite important, right? So whether you're looking at Quakers, some form of Anglicanism, or if you're looking at the Catholic Church, for example, you really want to make sure that you're looking at the nonconformist records. Now, up until this point, we've been looking at some relatively free-form materials, and over time, we know that British records get a lot more structured. So this is a pretty typical example of that. This is a 9th April 1928 marriage in West Riding in Yorkshire. And as you can see, it's very much formatted and formulaic. But the beauty of these records is that you not only get the marriage itself, you get their ages, their condition, so in this case, a bachelor and a spinster. You get the men's profession. You almost always get the father's name and the father's profession as well. So they're marriage records with a little bit of a bonus. And that's one of the beauties of British and Irish records and historical materials, is that they almost always have just a little bit more information added on. Now, if you wanted to talk and look over at Ireland, one of the examples for parish records is actually in a parish substitute, right? As we talked about a minute ago, there's been a lot of record loss across Ireland. So in this instance, these are actually record search forms. These were sent in by individuals across Ireland who were trying to prove they were born when they said they were born, because there was an old age pension that became available through the government. So in order to qualify, you had to send in this form and get someone in the parish to say, yes, she really is that old. So this is actually one of those forms. This is for a Sarah McGowan from 1860. And of course, right in the middle of some very tumultuous history across Ireland when many of them were immigrating into North America. And it provides the names of the individual, her parents, and a handful of other relatives that actually reside in the same household. So very similar to a census or a parish record, but one of those census and parish substitutes that allows us to put together our Irish families. Now, in some cases, all we have are transcriptions. That's how we refer to them. You may know them as indexes, and these are typically provided by our partners, especially at local family history societies. In this case, the Gwent Family History Society in Wales has provided us with a pretty extensive collection of baptisms. And the one great thing about this is that if we don't have the image, the society is almost always transcribing in great detail. So there's a lot of extra information that's pulled into the index that you wouldn't maybe normally find in an index of a record. So we do try to take as much information as we possibly can. Now, there's a lot of reasons why parish records are really the backbone of British and Irish research. And one of the things that's in your handout is a copy of this chart. And the idea here is that it really offers you an opportunity to say, which record should I look at and what do I need to know in order to find those records? Right. So, for example, public cemeteries weren't created in England until 1850. So anything before that, before the 1853 Burial Act, nearly everybody is buried in a local churchyard. Right, so if they're nonconformists, you need to understand that their local Church of England may or may not have buried them. If they are in the Church of England and they're participants, but they didn't pay their tithe or their tax. They may be somewhere else, right? They may have ended up in some other churchyard in another county or in another neighborhood, another area of that particular geographic region. So there's a lot of opportunities for research, but there's also, of course, a lot of nuances. And again, this chart is actually provided in your handout. So you'll have a copy of this for when you sit down to actually do research. Now, we've talked a lot about parish records and census records, but there's a lot of opportunity to tell people stories as well. And that's one of the other big important factors at Find My Past, is the ability to actually extract our ancestors' lives from these materials. So we're going to start with the opportunity to kind of do year-over-year research, right? Another really good census substitute is the England and Wales Electoral Registers, and the collection spans from 1910 to 1932, so much more recent. And actually, just a couple months ago, we added 32.6 million names and 14 million addresses just in this year. So the example that you're looking at is actually a famous suffragette. Her name was Clayton, and she is among those listed in the 1911 Electoral Registers. Now, I will hint, obviously, this is a very good way to prepare for the upcoming release of the 1921 Census of England and Wales, because you should be able to pinpoint pretty much exactly where your people of interest are located. Another fantastic resource is the National School Admission Registers and Logbooks, spans 1870 to 1914. And these are mostly administrative documents. These are records that were kept by the people who are actually running the schools. But this is a real opportunity to learn about our ancestors in their childhood, which is relatively unique. All right, so just to give you a quick example, this is from the Dorking British School in Surrey, and it's from April of 1870. And the administrator of the school is saying that on the 25th of April, on the Friday, Mrs. Champion, a mother, cabled, and she's been unable to send her children to school for nearly 3 months because her husband's been out of work, but they would come the Monday following. And don't you know it, on the Monday following, she records that Thomas and Henry did in fact return to school. Their father had had no work, and she repeats that that was the reason for their absence. This is a real glimpse of our ancestors' kind of day-to-day life, and and the reality of, well, my father was out of school and I wasn't, or my father was out of work, I wasn't able to attend school because those boys were probably helping to support the family during that time. Of course, the stories don't end with just school and marriage and death and birth. There's a lot to our ancestors' lives. So we'll get into a couple of those unique record sets. Occupation, of course, is a big one. Military service is a big one. The City of London haberdashers, apprentices, and freemen is one of my favorite record sets. Kind of just because I like to say haberdashers, but also just because the records are actually just really beautiful. The collection spans from 1526 to 1933, and they were created in London, but they include people from all over England because boys were sent to be apprentices from every corner of the country. So the haberdashers actually dates back all the way to 1371, but of course, there's not a lot of existing records from those first century and a half, 2 centuries. So from 1526, we have a very, very early perspective of what it was like to be an apprentice in England in those early years. Now, if we take a closer look at this example, we actually see here in the middle, Robert Collins, who is listed on the Register of Freedmen Admissions for 1530. His master is the name in the middle, John Roll, but he is now being declared a freeman from his apprentice. So he's finished his apprenticeship, probably 7 years, and he's now becoming his own independent member of the Worshipful Company of Haberdashers. About 100 years later, another Robert Collins, you could tell I was looking for a Robert Collins, right, is also included in these materials. And the interesting part about this entry is it lists not just Robert and his role as an apprentice, but also the name of his father and where his father was a resident. So he's the son of Augustine Collins in the county of Hereford. And he's being bound to Nathaniel Breyer for 7 years as a stocking trimmer on Grub Street in London. So a lot of really, really interesting information and the ability to kind of pull some of this early history, really kind of across the history of England, which of course is so important actually to the rest of the world. Now, the one I hinted at the beginning is that Register of Licenses to Pass Beyond the Seas. This collection actually runs from 1573 to 1677, so just over a century. And I'm just going to be honest, this is one of my absolute favorite record sets on the site, probably my number one or number two. And the reason for that is because I had known for many years that Henry Collins, my ancestor, had traveled to America in 1635 on the Abigail. But all of that information had always been in kind of the printed book in a published work typeset, right? Black and white. And when I showed this document, I'm going to show it to you in a second. When I sat down and showed this record to my dad, it actually brought tears to his eyes because it's such an incredible thing to see the actual parchment, or at least a picture of the actual parchment, versus just kind of this published black and white book. Now, in this collection, there are two main types of records. There's the actual people traveling to Europe and the colonies, and that runs the whole gamut, the whole length of the collection, 1573 to 1677. There's also a large collection of statutory oaths of allegiance by soldiers before they were leaving to serve in the Low Countries or Europe on the continent from 1613 to 1633. So there are more than 5,000 passengers listed in this collection, bound for a number of different colonies: Barbados, Boston, St. Kitts, New England, just as a general label, Charleston, Bermuda, Providence, Salem, and so forth. So here's my Henry Collins, and this is, of course, just a snippet of it. And this is him here with his wife and their 3 children. And it lists their ages as well. And then to the side, it actually indicates that that other column of people, John and Mary there, they are servants of the Collins family, which that relationship had not been clear to me in all of those published works and other research opportunities until I actually saw this document. So it's a great one. I love this one. Now, another collection that is really relevant to those of us looking for our colonial ancestors and even our Irish ancestors is the Quaker or Society of Friends collection from Ireland. Starts in the mid 1600s and finishes up in the 1940s, so a huge span of time. And in this instance, they recorded a whole number of events, right? If you've worked with Society of Friends records before, you're going to be familiar with the types of different information, but you're going to find marriages, births, congregational records, history, school records. And in this instance, you're going to actually find movement between the different meetings, which is what they call their parishes, right? It's their meeting house. So this is actually James Warner in 1729. He's preparing to leave for Philadelphia, and the meeting writes him a letter and saying he's a member in good standing and you should welcome him into your meeting. And the thing that I like about this one is it actually says to friends of Philadelphia or elsewhere in America, right? It's very clear James wasn't actually sure where he was going to end up. Most of these individuals did actually leave for the Americas at some point. So you're going to find a really direct connection between Society of Friends in Ireland and the Society of Friends in the United States. Also, just a side note, they often recorded events of people who were not members of the church, but were prominent members of the community. So if you're really struggling with your Irish research, I suggest you look at this record set just on the off chance that they wrote something down about the person of interest. Another really fun one from Ireland is our dog license registers from 1866 to 1914. And, you know, a lot of people are very surprised at this because what can a dog license register tell me? Well, in reality, it's actually just a tax, right? They introduced these licenses in 1865. It was 2 shillings per dog and 6 pence in administration fees. And the Irish had to record their dogs, right? Just like we do today. So it often includes, or at minimum includes, the name of the human, the address, the county that they lived in, the year and date of the license itself, and then in almost every case has information on the dog. So this is what they look like. This example is showing us Henry Good here right at the top of the page, 1869 from County Cork. He had 2 dogs, 1 male terrier and 1 female terrier. And occasionally in that remarks column, you'll even get the name of the dog, which is pretty fun. And Sue, I'm really sorry, but we don't have any cat registers that I know of. So I mentioned that our Scottish records collection grew pretty significantly this year. So let's talk about that for just a minute. We did release in July of 2021 over 10 million new records to our Scottish Parish Records collection, or Vital Records collection. It's again now the largest collection of Scottish family history records available online. So the year spans are pretty extensive. Births and baptisms and deaths and burials both start in 1564. Marriages start in 1561. And you can see they go well into kind of more modern eras. Deaths and burials going all the way up to 2017. Now, this is not something that we could have done by ourselves, certainly not. It was a collaborative effort across a number of different family history societies across the entire country of Scotland. And we really owe a lot of gratitude to all of these organizations for making this material available online on any website, really, for all of us to take advantage of. A couple of quick examples. These are, again, for the most part, transcription only. There's not images attached to these. And this is a pretty standard example, John Lawrence in 1688. And this is actually his marriage in Trinity Gask in Scotland. A couple other additional opportunities, though. Scotland, of course, has a real tradition of irregular marriages, and irregular marriages were legal all the way up until 1940. So an irregular marriage is defined by a couple kind of declaring their marriage in front of witnesses, but not necessarily in a church ceremony or a civil ceremony. The church would later legitimize the marriage by making the couple pay a fine, and then they would put the information into the Kirk Session Register. So very loose marriage laws in Scotland. And that, of course, means that there are a lot of cross-border marriages as well. You may be familiar with the term Gretna Green, right? And so those materials are in this collection also. So these are people taking advantage of kind of these loose marriage laws, going just over the border from England or Ireland, getting married quickly or conveniently, and then, of course, returning home. Now, we know Gretna Green, and that's pretty common terminology. But for people in Ireland, and especially in Northern Ireland, the place to look is actually Portpatrick, which is the example on the screen. This is George Atkinson and his spouse, Catherine, who did, in fact, get married in Portpatrick. They are from Louth over in Ireland. And when you look on the map, it becomes really obvious why they did this, right? They're in Louth, just south of the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And Portpatrick is right there. It's the first village you hit when you cross over to Scotland. So it makes sense that this was essentially the Northern Ireland's Gretna Green. So again, if you're looking for those Irish ancestors, which of course can be so troublesome, look in this Scottish records collection. You may be surprised at what you find. And one more to highlight from Scotland, and really this is just such a fun story. This is a copy of the 1821 South Ronaldsay and Bury Census out of Orkney. And the reason this story is so cool actually is because this is a copy that was made when the 1821 census was taken, right? So someone sat down and made a copy of this census before they sent it off. It was found a couple of years ago in the drawer of a farmer's house. So it's a house that's been sitting there for a couple hundred years. And it was, you know, in that spot behind the drawer that kind of everything kind of just falls down and you lose stuff back in there. That's where they found this copy of the census. So as far as we know, it's the only existing copy that has survived to today. It was donated to a local family history society, and they allowed us to scan the images and index it and make it available. It does have a little bit more detail than typical Scottish censuses of the time. Sometimes has very little, like you're looking at on the screen, but often will have full names, everybody in the household, full ages, and in most cases occupations. It's also free to use. You don't have to have a subscription to access this census. Okay, I've mentioned it a couple times, and Sue as well in the intro. The Find My Past is bringing the 1921 census of England and Wales online for the first time. And this is really exciting. It's not just exciting for people in England and Wales, I promise. There's a lot of opportunity for North American researchers in this census. Now, a couple of quick statistics, because this is kind of the big news of the year for us. There are 30,000 bound volumes of census materials to work through. It took us 2.5 years and more because we're still in the process of digitizing and transcribing and conserving these. So they've now all been scanned and they will be moved into long-term storage in England. 38 million historical records and 1.6 linear kilometers of shelving. I did the math. It's just over half a mile worth of shelving, or 11 football fields, just almost 11 football fields, depending on how you visualize things. Right, there are a number of opportunities for all of us, war brides, home children, especially for people in Canada who descend from the home children community. There's a lot of return migration happening in 1921. The idea of tourism is actually much bigger in that interwar period than it ever has been before. For those of us using DNA, it's going to be absolutely crucial for DNA descendancy tracing. You will be able to search by address, search by occupation and employer. Employer is listed for the first time in a UK census. So not just what they do, but who pays them to do it. It's the first census to record divorces in the UK, and it's the first time that orphans are included in the question. Now, the reason I say that is because the orphan question is very specific in the 1921 census. It's not just, are you an orphan? It's, is your father passed away? Has your mother passed away? Or have both parents passed away? And they had to answer that very specifically. So it's an exciting opportunity for researchers really all over the globe who were impacted by the historical British Empire. Which of course leads us into just that, right? Let's talk a little bit about records outside of the UK. And we're going to start with the way they left. So the passenger list leaving the UK collection is actually, in fact, a British collection, but it runs from 1890 to 1960. So for those of you who have European roots, came over relatively recently, this may be a really excellent record set for you. In the example on the screen is actually my ancestors, Albert and Amanda Tober. They left on the Empress of France on May 19th, 1928 from Southampton, and they arrived in Quebec. And they are, in fact, subjects of Russia. So my ancestors essentially walked across Russia to the Black Sea, traveled over the Black Sea, got themselves over to Southampton, and then got on a boat for North America. At the time of this passenger list collection, Liverpool was actually one of the largest and busiest ports in the world. So even for those of you who have straight European ancestry and don't have any British and Irish, it's still worth your time to take a look at this record set to see if you can find them, because it's very likely that they went to England first to get on a boat for United States or Canada. Another great record set and a good example of how records kind of end up in different places is this register from the American Red Cross Service Club. So this is actually out of North Devon in England, and you can see from the time frame it is 1943 to 1945, so that World War II period. And what this really is actually is the register that was sitting at the front door of the American Red Cross Club. So when US servicemen wanted to go in and have a pint or relax for a little bit, they had to go in and they had to sign in every time. This particular club was located at the Assault Training Center in North Devon, which was set up in 1942. And it was established as a center to develop and practice the amphibious assault exercises that prepared the Allied forces for the landing on D-Day in Normandy. So in many instances, this is our American servicemen being trained and stationed in England, enjoying themselves and relaxing before they essentially all of them, headed off onto that very important and historic landing on D-Day. A great example out of Canada, something you won't find anywhere else, is the Oddfellows life insurance applications from Ontario. And I am a particular fan of fraternal organizations. They offer a lot of information, but these examinations, these applications are quite detailed. So this is actually the application of an individual, J.L. Lawrence, who applied on the 14th of March, 1903 is when he had his exam. He was 26 years old at the time. When you open up these documents, and all of these pages are available on Find My Past, it's actually pretty extensive, right? We have in various locations across the record, the names of the individual, his spouse, and his residence and so forth, his birth date, his occupation. We have family medical history. We even have notes from the physician, right? So we have next of kin here. We have actually 3 generations on this one application. And the note from the physician saying, I recommend him for entry and for essentially insurance coverage is what this really is. And the reason for that is because he does not have any extra fat. That's what it says. So thank you, Dr. Neff, for being so specific on this particular record. Another great example of one of our relationships in North America is the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. We have indexed and transcribed a great deal of information from their collection, just one of which I pulled out as an example. The Book of Deeds of Manumissions of Slaves from 1774 to 1792. It is part of actually a larger collection. So this register book was kept at a particular location. We're not exactly sure where, but it was eventually donated to a Society of Friends meeting house. And so that collection, the Society of Friends material, was eventually donated to Historical Society of Pennsylvania. It's been sitting on their shelf ever since. Manumission deeds gave the enslaved peoples their freedom after the death of the enslaver, typically. So it was a legal document they filed with the courthouse that said, once I die, this person will become free. There are copies of this available online, but as far as I know, this is the only version of it that has been indexed by name. So when you get an example of these, you see that this is the record of Charles Draper from 1779 and his niece, Elizabeth Draper Bowman. They had an agreement around a young girl named Esther, who was about 16, and Anthony, about 9 years old, that they would gain their freedom when they reached a lawful age. So for them, it was 18 for Esther and 21 for Anthony. And that's the legal agreement, that they're essentially transferring these individuals from Charles to Elizabeth. And once they grew up, they would then become free peoples. Now, another way that Find My Past is really working to try and help our customers explore their entire family history across the British Isles is, of course, through passenger lists. Those are crucial for just about everybody doing genealogical research. And in order to support that, a couple of years ago, we created a collection called the British and Irish Roots. So what we did is we have all of these different passenger lists across the website. And in fact, there's over 99.8 million records of people saying in some way, I'm either from England or I'm from Ireland or I'm from Scotland, I'm from Wales. Maybe it's much more specific than that. But those pieces of information are spread across a number of different collections on the website, historical records. So we took all of those and we kind of put them all into one big bucket. So you can do one search that generates a number of different historical materials. So these clues of origin really come from every type of document: census records, naturalization documents, draft registrations, passenger lists, of course, marriage and death records, kind of all put into one place. So let me show you what that looks like. If you do a search, and I just, as an example, search for William Todd, who was born in around 1818. And my search results include New Orleans passenger list, Irish famine immigrants, the Census of the United States, New York Castle Garden Immigration Index, Atlantic Ocean and Gulf Coast ports passenger list, and so forth, right? You've even got an Idaho entry in there that could be potentially a source for William Todd. So what we've done is we've just taken all of those opportunities and put them into one place. So instead of searching a number of different collections, you can search in one spot and search them all simultaneously. So it's a great tool, especially if you're just getting started in your immigrant ancestor research. Now, I did mention at the beginning the U.S. marriages collection, so let's give you a couple details about that. There are now over 215,000 vital records. I need to update that number there. They really, of course, bring your family together, right? Marriage records are essential in understanding the relationships in our family tree. So we have a number of different types of records. Register books like this one. This is actually the index to marriage records from Madison County, Alabama. So another one of my ancestors, William Clark Davis, getting married to Brooksy Timberlake back in 1899. And then in this instance, we actually also have the certificates. So this is Brooksy and William Clark Davis in their certificate form, also from, of course, Madison County, Alabama. So if you're looking for those essential marriage records, you want to probably take a glance at Find My Past and just do a cursory search, if nothing else, to see if we have your marriage record of interest. Now, of course, we have records from other parts of the British Empire as well, not just North America. Just a couple of highlights. it looks like I took out a slide actually. So just to mention Australia, New Zealand, we have a number of different collections from that region of the world, including the convict transportation registers and a great collection of crime, prison, and punishment records that reflects both the English side of the story and the Australian side of the story, or New Zealand. We've also just recently published a couple of newspapers from New Zealand and Australia that you won't find on Trove or any of the other websites. We're pretty sure that the Find My Past platform is the only place you can find those newspapers. I also mentioned the Catholic Heritage Archive. I want to cover that really quickly. These are largely Sacramento registers from, again, around the world, but just to give you a glimpse of the locations that we've covered. So all of Ireland, of course, and almost all of Scotland, and most of the major dioceses across England. In the United States, we've published the Sacramento registers from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, Baltimore, Chicago, Cincinnati, and we are currently working on scanning New York, the Archdiocese of New York, which of course is a super big one because of all of the immigration into New York. Sacramento records are almost all found in English and Latin, although we have found some German, Polish, Spanish, Italian, and a handful of other languages across the collection. And one of the reasons these are so good for genealogy is not just because they're another faith represented, right? It's the type of information that the Roman Catholic Church was likely to record. So in most instances, and actually technically by papal law, every parish was supposed to record the sacraments at least in one place. And those records belong to the parish specifically. But the baptism record is the one that's the most important because that was the one that was supposed to follow that individual through their religious life. So if they were baptized in Ireland and they got married in New York City, in theory, the parish in New York was supposed to communicate with the parish in Ireland and say, hey, this person got married today. You have to record it in their baptismal entry. That didn't always happen, of course, but when you do find it, it's absolutely fantastic. You also see information like this in the margin of this particular record, which is a marriage record. We have the names of both parents for the, I think it's for the husband that's being that's getting married, and the location of those parents, right? So we have 2 generations worth of information, which is beautiful. Another really good example, and one that is a personal favorite also, is this one from St. Ignatius Loyola Church in Manhattan. I apologize. And the reason I like this actually is because of the history and the story that you can kind of infer behind this record. So we're looking at the marriage of David Flanagan, and in parentheses, it says Protestant, baptized in Church of England, but he's being married in 1880. Right. So by that point, there is no more Church of England in the United States. It just doesn't exist anymore. It's either an Anglican parish or more likely a, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I just blanked on the faith, but it's another denomination, right? Episcopalian, that's what it is. So they are probably saying that if he had been in the United States, he would have been Episcopalian, right? Because the Church of England doesn't exist in America in 1880, which means that David here was probably actually born and baptized in England, right? So this is the marriage record doing exactly what the baptism record is supposed to do, but backwards. So it is likely then that David was born in England, and we were actually able to trace him in the Church of England parishes. So he converted to Roman Catholicism in order to marry Mary here. And of course, we've just recently added new materials. This is an ever-growing collection in our materials, in our holdings, for the Catholic Church. We've added the Plymouth Diocese, England Roman Catholic Parish baptisms, marriages, burials, and congregational records for Plymouth. And then additional materials from the Southwark Diocese are also being published and on their way. Okay, so with that, let's dive in a little bit into how to best use the website, because it is a little bit different than what some of us are used to. And usually when we start a new website or a new project, it kind of feels a little bit like this. And I think that the Find My Past site can feel this way for a lot of people in North America, because it is a British site. It's designed by people who are in Britain. They know British history. They use British vernacular. The cultures are just different enough that the approach to building a website, it can be visible, right? It's easy to identify those differences. There are a couple of primary tools that I want you to be aware of. The first that we're going to look at is the all record sets. I'll take you through just kind of a generic all record search, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of those advanced search and other features that I mentioned at the beginning. So the all record sets page is essentially our card catalog on Find My Past. And instead of just making it kind of a static list, we've actually added some features that allow you to search in a much more refined way. And I typically am going to the all record sets page if I'm looking for a very specific record set, right? Like it's the fastest way to get to passengers list leaving the UK. It's also an excellent tool when you're building your research plan. So think of the card catalog or the all record sets on Find My Past as kind of a card catalog plus a little bit of Google at the same time. And of course, hopefully, we are all actually looking at the card catalog on any genealogy website, whether it's a public library or a corporate entity or a nonprofit, so we can really understand what their collection looks like. So there's a couple of ways to search the all record sets. Now, when you open the page, it will just literally list everything on the website, but you can start to filter that right away. So in this instance, I filtered just to the United Kingdom, and the list in front of me underneath that big green arrow on your screen will actually then just show me all records that have to do with the United Kingdom. So it removes the US Census, for example, right? Because that's not a UK record set. I can then get a lot more specific. I can start to look at specific locations, for example. In this instance, I've searched for Warwickshire County, England. So now the list is further refined. It shows me just records that include someone, at least one person from Warwickshire County. If I'm looking for a specific ancestor, say he was born from 1800 to, I think he was born somewhere between 1800 and 1820. I can put those years in the when boxes that you can see on the screen, and it will then refine the list even further to show me just the records that include people from Warwickshire County born, from 1800 to 1820. So it's a great way to build, again, that research plan and kind of understand what the records are that are out there and available. It's a great tool, especially if you are new to British and Irish research. Now, the other way to use it is, of course, just utilizing a keyword. This is kind of the Google part of the all record sets page. So in this instance, I've just typed in the word Catholic, and everything in our collection that has at least one Catholic record in it pops up on the screen, no matter where the location. In this instance, I've limited it to the United Kingdom, but you could certainly do that for the United States or for the entire world. So it's just a couple of different ways to utilize the all record sets page that really gives you a lot more power and control and allows you to really refine what is it that I'm going to research in today, right? If you want to be really intentional with your research time, this is a great way to do it. Okay, when it comes to just a basic name search, which I think is what most of us are pretty accustomed to doing, there are a number of ways to access that when you log in to Find My Past. So what you're looking at is what we refer to as the dashboard. I've logged into my account and I'm getting ready to actually use the site for research. So you can search all records right there from that main screen. You can do an advanced search. And we also have this drop-down menu at the top. So what's the difference? Well, the advanced search link under this search box, right on this screen, takes you to your local territory. So if you're in the US, it's going to take you to US and Canadian records. If you're sitting in Ireland, it's going to take you to the Irish records collection. If you go to the drop-down menu at the top of the screen and go to search all records, it will take you to the world record collection, assuming, of course, that you have access with your subscription or you're using the system through a library database. Right, so when we click on that drop-down menu, this is what we get. We get a number of different options. We can do search all records, we can go to newspapers and periodicals, or we can look at any of these particular different categories. And I'll introduce those actually in just a second. But keep in mind that there are a number of different approaches. And the reason we've done this is because we want you to control your research. This isn't the computer thinking for you. This is you kind of telling the computer what you want, right? We know that our users, researchers, family historians are almost always very driven by a very specific goal, a question they're trying to answer. So we're doing everything we can to put you in the driver's seat. You're telling the computer what you want to see versus producing a list of millions of search results that no one can realistically actually search through. So we're really driving towards quality over quantity. Now, those categories that are on the screen, kind of outside of all those pink circles, right, are listed here. So we have our primary record categories. Every record on the Find My Past site is organized into one of these groups, one of these kind of categories. Each one of these categories then has a series of subcategories. So if you understand the hierarchy of how the record collection is actually organized, it will allow you to navigate through the Find My Past system in a much more efficient way. So let's say you want to look at birth, marriage, death, records, right? Parish registers. When you click on that category, you'll see a number of subcategories, including religious ceremonies, family histories and pedigrees, wills and probate, because if they originate from the parish, they're part of that parish register collection. So it's just one example, but again, understanding and using the system of subcategories is how the entire structure of the site is designed. So if you take a few minutes to familiarize yourself with those categories and subcategories, which again, you can find in a variety of different locations, it'll really make your movement through the site a lot more efficient. Now to see those, you can use that drop-down menu that I showed you a minute ago, but you can also use the main search screen. So in this instance, that first yellow arrow off to the left-hand side, that's pointing at all the different subcategories. You can see that birth, marriage, and death, the parish registers category is green, it's highlighted in green, and it's been opened and expanded to show me those subcategories. You can also use the little button that says browse subcategory next to the yellow arrow to the right. And that will actually bring up a pop-up that shows you all of those. So let's say you wanted to look at civil marriage and divorce and parish marriages at the same time, but you don't want to look at anything else. You can check the little box when you click on that browse subcategory link, and it will allow you to search just those subcategories. Again, putting you in the driver's seat, trying to make sure that you can refine the search as much as you want to. So in this instance, I'm searching in that category of parish registers. I'm looking for the last name of Collins around 1630 because I'm trying to find my Henry Collins and all of his children before he left for the Americas, right? So this is actually showing me 917 results. It's filtered down to parish registers. I've got my year in, so I'm refining my time frame, baptisms around 1630, and I have 917 results. I can continue to filter from here. I can play around with my search, and I certainly have a lot of opportunities to dig in, right, if I wanted to. Now this button down here at the bottom, I like this one because it shows me as I change my search results, that number will change, right? So if I added in a very specific location like Stepney in London, it would take that blue button down and it would say, oh, view 17 results. So without even clicking, I know what my search filters are going to produce for me. The other feature that I like about Find My Past is that little pink check mark. So what that's indicating to me is that someone on my account, presumably me, has actually run this search before and I've looked at that record already. And as long as you maintain an account at some level on Find My Past, that little pink check mark will stay with you. So your search history will always be with you, which I find very useful. The other thing to point out here is the two different icons. So we have an icon that's kind of like a little piece of paper, that's the transcription or the index. And then we have one that looks like a JPEG symbol, kind of like a photograph. That actually indicates that there is an image attached to that search result, maybe an image of an index, maybe an image of the actual original record. So in my search results, one of the search results, I find Henry Collins, born 1629, baptized in November of that year. His address is Ratcliffe Highway. His father is Henry, who is a starch maker. His mother is Anne. They're in the St. Dunstan Stepney Parish. And in this instance, it actually records that he is 5 days old. So the Docklands Ancestors organization that we were able to pull this information from actually recorded a great number of details. Now, if I get on this search result and I scroll down, I get information on the records and the source of that record. So don't overlook this. This is information that's provided because it may add context to your research. It may give you some clue that you're looking for beyond the history and the context of that record. Why was that record created? How was it created? Who created it? All of that could be really important to our research. So on every instance, scroll down and read that extra information. I've gone way over time. I'm really sorry. I'll try to hurry. I did look up Ratcliffe Highway. It's a small road through London. I was able to actually walk those steps not too long ago, a couple years ago. I found it on a couple different maps. So there's Stepney Church and there's Ratcliffe Highway. And then if I go back and take another look at my search results, if we filter by parish now, because I know that entry was from Stepney, we can see all the Collinses within 2-year span period, and right away by comparing just the transcriptions, we have a sibling. So this is John Collins, who is also the son of Henry and Anne, and he was 8 days old when he was baptized. All right, let's quickly hit newspapers and periodicals. Newspapers spanning the British Empire: England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, British America, Canada, Barbados, India, West Indies, China, and a handful of other locations. This is all from a partnership with the British Library. It's one of the largest newspaper collections in the world. And we've been scanning in their institute for 11 years now, which is a partnership we're very excited about. So a handful of materials just to show you right off the bat. This really does kind of span the gamut of the British Empire. The Australian and New Zealand Gazette, for example, runs from 1850 to 1882. We have a number of opportunities to research our North American ancestors in British papers. That's a topic perhaps for another day, because I could go on and on about that for some time. But just to give you a couple of examples, this is from the Illustrated London News in 1884. It's a variety of sketches, and it's entitled "Members of the British Association on their way to Canada on the SS Parisian." They were essentially going over for a visit, and many of them actually ended up staying. And then, of course, we can go into that lovely history between the mainland or the homeland and all of its colonies. So in this case, this is an interview with Dr. Benjamin Franklin that was published in the Scots magazine in 1767. And one of my favorite things that they talk about in this interview, it goes on for a couple of pages, is they're asking him, should we basically send a military force into the colonies to calm everybody down? And he says, well, no, don't do that. What are they going to do? They're going to fight you? They're farmers. They're not going to take up arms and fight the British army. That's crazy. It's nonsense. They won't find a rebellion, but they will force one. And then, of course, we all know what happens, right? So just a lovely glance at some of our contextual research and contextual history. And then, of course, on Find My Past, we're very pleased to have the Percy Index. Percy, if you're not familiar with it, is periodical source index. It's created by the Allen County Public Library Genealogy Center, and it is an incredible resource. So we have all of these publications across the genealogy community. Societies publish newsletters or journals or heavily researched articles. And the idea here is that you wouldn't be able to find those articles if you're sitting in Colorado, like I am, and it's published in a Florida Genealogical Society newsletter, right? So the example I always like to use is this article about pay certificates for the New York militia from 1780 to 1881. And it was published by the Seattle Genealogical Society, right? I'm actually researching my ancestor in Washington County, New York. There's no other way for me to know to look at the Seattle Genealogical Society publication for that particular article about the New York militia without Percy. So Percy's a really, really valuable tool. And it really helps when you're researching some of those kind of more unusual situations. Like this one, I found a couple of years ago that one of my ancestors has a mention in his obituary about the Gypsy tribe of Stanleys in Ohio. And Percy led me to this article about the stories and obituaries of the Montgomery County Gypsies, in which actually my ancestor's farm is actually called out. And it informs me that they used the farm as a camp at some point in their travels across Ohio. So that research continues, but I certainly wouldn't be as far into that research as I am without Percy. All right, so a couple things to watch for just as I close up for today. There's some special search filters. There are search tools that are unique to UK records. There's spellings, nuances in language, right? Think about this, that in the UK, in Britain, they don't refer to the War of 1812. It's part of the larger Napoleonic Wars. It's only over here that we call it the War of 1812. So while we have great records that cover that time frame, you're not going to find the War of 1812 listed on Find My Past. They're going to be under that Napoleonic records category. So put your British thinking cap on a little bit when you're using the site. There are a number of special search filters available in different subcategories of searches. So for example, in the Irish Census, you can search by other household member. In directories and almanacs, you can search by the parish or the diocese if you don't want the name or the county. On the 1939 register, this is actually brand new as of today. You guys are the first to hear about this. We've added the ability to search by special interest group. In the 1939 register of England and Wales, a number of notations were made, including these main categories that we've identified and pulled out. And a couple of these are, of course, historical terms, right? But we do have a number of refugees, people who spoke Welsh, people who were involved in some kind of a heavy labor, heavy worker type occupation. And the reason these had to be called out, if you see these notations just over here, this is right in the margin of the book itself, the register. The pink circle is actually over a notation that says HW, standing for heavy worker, but it's so faded and damaged that you can just barely tell it's there. So we went through the process of identifying these so that they would be easier to search for. So you see it again in that bottom entry as a heavy worker. We've also added the ability to search the entire UK census collection by address, which is a fantastic tool for those people who are looking especially around house history. I would also note that you want to be careful with locations. Oops, oh, wrong slide. Okay, so in this instance, these are some from our military collection, and you see a number of ways in which they indicated that this person was serving or could have served in the United States, right? America, British America, USA, or USA with spaces. My personal favorite, United States, right? Even the typo was transcribed. So think about that British perspective of history when you're diving into these materials and what was common kind of across the territory that you're working in. Last, but certainly not least, right? I'm gonna skip a couple bullet point here summaries, but I'm gonna leave you with this, right? Even if you get frustrated with your British Isles research, because it is hard to find your ancestors' origin location, do this, right? Think about this as inspiration. This is John Lawrence. I do have an ancestor named John Lawrence. Unfortunately, this is not his vessel. It is the Try Again instead. So I would encourage all of you to give Find My Past a try and then try again and see what you might discover.
Jen. Thank you so much, Jen. I mean, that was amazing. One of the things that I thought was going to back up the title slide. One of the things that you touched on that I was, going to ask some questions about was, of course, you mentioned the people that moved in from Europe, into the UK and then came over here. And that's exactly what happened to my family, as you mentioned, from Russia to Liverpool, actually, and then over here. So I think one of those points is that as we talk about with the United States, any way your ancestor would have come in contact with the federal government, we're looking at any way our ancestors might have come in contact with the UK.
Yeah, exactly.
Even when you use those the Red Cross Club. So we have to think out that way. That was a good point. And then also the point about going down in the collections and identifying and strategizing your searching. You want to talk a little bit more about the strategizing, the searching, and the benefits of that too?
I would love to actually. Research plans are crucial, but I'm a big fan of making a research plan that works for you, and not making it something that you think you can find blog post after blog post telling you how to build a research plan. But for me, my research plan could be on a Post-it note. As long as I know how I'm spending my time today, I know that I'm going to be spending my time efficiently and effectively, right? So if you start on any new website, really, with a card catalog, and you say, these are the records that I think are the low-hanging fruit. This is what I'm most interested in. This is the obvious possible opportunity for me. You start with those, and then you expand your search out from there because, maybe you don't find it right away. Maybe you're in Ireland and Irish research is tough, and you need to go into dog license registers or records of the Quakers to find what you're looking for. But you start with the low-hanging fruit and you work your way out, right? And I think that card catalog and that research plan really allows you to do that. Start with one question, build a list of possible resources, both online and off, on all of the different websites, and then start researching, right? We lose a lot of time just jumping into a website and typing in John Smith and hoping that ours will magically pop to the surface.
Mhm, mhm. I would like to thank you for the shout out to the cat records, but I have used those. I have used those dog license records. They're fascinating, and
Really good.
just to see, again, to give part of the story, and then just quickly, not to discount the general broad search, because the discoverability
Absolutely. Yeah.
times, of records that you might find, but being efficient in your research, and trying to identify what it is you want to know, because knowing what you want to know is the key to finding out what you want.
Right. Exactly. How do you know what you
So
don't know?
exactly,
Right.
exactly. And then let's see, did I have it? Oh, I also wanted to mention, I mean, not to take Mitch's part of reading some of the questions. We do have a subscription here to Find My Past at the library, in library use only. One of the questions was the difference between the library edition and a personal subscription.
Yeah, so not actually a big difference between the two, but it does, of course, depend on your personal subscription, right? If you only have kind of the starter package, which just shows you kind of some basic British and Irish and some basic North American records, you're not going to get as much access to newspapers and some of these other more um, contextual records, right? Like the school records are not in the starter package. So if you're using the library access, you should get access to basically everything on the site, with very few exceptions. If you're using a subscription at home, it really depends on the level of subscription you're at, but you can, of course, examine that from your subscription page, from your profile, and see what it would take to upgrade to get to the rest of the materials.
Right, and that's always important. I mean, with anything, I mean, even if
Mhm.
even if you're going to Target to buy something, what actually should I buy, this one or should I buy this one? What's
Yeah.
the best microwave? What does this do? What does that
Right,
do? And
absolutely.
compare 'em to,
And
go ahead.
I all, especially if you have access to a library system, use the library, right? Take advantage of the subscription at the library. And then if you decide there's enough there that you need to go home and actually upgrade, then make that decision, right? But do your shopping around, do your window shopping at the library.
Thanks, Jen. We would love
You're
to
welcome.
we would love to have you visit here at the library.
I
And I
would
will
love
say,
to.
and Find My Past is in library use only, no remote access. So please do visit us here at the library, Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. Mitch, thank you, Jen. Mitch, any questions?
Sure, we do have a couple of questions here. First, I want to tell Jenna, very, very informative. That's a lot of information. Thank you for that. Mike does have a question. Mike asked if Find My Past has any connection with Roots Magic.
We do have a connection with Roots Magic, so you should be able to see hints from Find My Past inside the Roots Magic software system. But I heard recently, and I don't know a whole lot about this technical end of that relationship. There's some kind of issue with the latest Roots Magic update, I think, and so might not be as smooth as it was like 6 months ago. But my understanding is that they're working on it and they're trying to figure that out together. So, but there is a connection there.
Okay, yeah, they did just upgrade to number 8.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
So Gay Carter saw the school records that you mentioned, and is at, or excuse me, is it Gay Carter? Which countries are the school records for? Is Scotland included?
Now, the school collection is largely England and Wales. So there's a handful of materials from Scotland, but not nearly as many as we have from England and Wales.
Okay, and Gay asked a little bit later, does British and Irish Roots collection include Scotland? I mean, in general, do you have some Scottish records there too?
Yeah, the British and Irish, I saw that comment actually scroll by. The British and Irish Roots collection does include Scotland, as well as Ireland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and England. So all of the British Isles in the British and Irish Roots collection.
Okay, great. And Stephanie said that in one of the first slides, there was a relationship to Henry Collins. Is that something that was there?
Yeah, absolutely. That Henry Collins was my 9th great grandfather. Yep, ninth. I had to think about that for a second. And he has lots of descendants across the US. So I wouldn't be surprised if she came back and said we are related somehow. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay, that's neat. Now, Rosalind has a question, a really something that apparently affected Rosalind. Rosalind was reviewing some U.S. newspapers, and apparently they were replaced or removed in order to add some British records. So can you kind of speak to when records go up, do they stay up? Do you move some records?
Yeah, so actually this is the first time we've ever had to remove anything really significant from the Find My Past site. So we all didn't really like this very much, but the US newspapers were removed from Find My Past. And the reason for that, Rosalind, to be honest, is that we got them from a partner. That partner increased their rates and inside the relationship, and we just didn't get enough use of those records to substantiate the expense. So sometimes, unfortunately, when you work for that corporate environment, you kind of have to make those financial business decisions, and that's ultimately what happened here.
It does come down to business decisions
Sometimes, yeah, yeah.
Well, that's all the questions that I have for you, Jen. I'll pass it off to Sue again. Thanks a lot.
Well, Jen, thank you. And I will say that our colleague Joy mentioned that when you brought up the Red Cross records, she was in England in London doing some work in London, and it has turned into a pub where she has had a pint or two now. So
yeah. I a colleague of mine have worked on those records pretty extensively together. We did when we published them. And it's quite emotional reading through some of those pages because you recognize that a lot of those kids didn't come back from D-Day, right? But he has been to the pub, and I have a guarantee that the next time I go over, COVID allowing, I will get a chance to go to the pub myself. So yeah, it's a pretty special place.
that'll be great, Jen. That'll be a lot of fun to sit there and think about, and be able to look at those records and know what they look like, to think what it was like in history. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, Jen, it was a pleasure seeing you, of course, my friend, and thank you so much for the wonderful, I learned a lot about this database, and I'm going to go, and I have some time period there in the UK too. I'm going to go and use it, and we hope that everybody got the opportunity to just be wowed by what's there at Find My Past, UK and United States. So just don't think it's UK. Use the catalog. Enjoy searching, and thank you again, Jen, and thank you all for joining us today. We will see you next week on the First Nations Research with Kurt Witcher at 2 o'clock on the 12th. Thank you so much.